2:52 says, Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and all the people. How many of you have ever heard this phrase? Oh, grow up. We all know what that means, right? Oh, grow up. How many still hear that? Yeah. Sometimes, sometimes I'm a man in a boy's body, and there are times I just need to learn to grow up. We know what it means when we hear it, though. You're immature. You don't measure up. That you're less than you should be. Well, what we are about to do is embark on a journey called Grown Up Faith. Most of you know that this past winter, Pam and I went to Orlando, Florida for the Pastors Gathering. It's a every 4-year gathering that they do somewhere in where it's warm. Usually somewhere in Florida. This last year was in Orlando. It's been in Jacksonville. It's been a couple other places. And again, you guys, between the district, between you guys and Wesley Investment Foundation, we were able to go and have a wonderful time. And we had heard some amazing speakers. The only complaint I have about the gathering is it was way too short. I mean, well, we ended up in Florida and we woke up to temperatures in the 40s and we only got into the 60s in January. That was the only thing I was a little disappointed that Florida didn't give us a little bit more warmth, and that we didn't get to either coast. We wanted to get out to the Gulf Coast and to the Atlantic coast. But we heard some amazing speakers, ate way too much food. And one of those amazing speakers was Kevin Myers. Kevin Meyer. Kevin is the pastor of 12 Stone Church. 12 Stone Church sits just outside of Atlanta and Lawrenceville, has 8 satellite campuses, and their weekly worship attendance is 16,000 people. 16,000 people show up every weekend at 12 Stone. Really amazing. But Kevin, this past year, published a book called Grown Up Faith, and he was sharing some of the things about this book at the gathering. And this series is loosely based. While I'm using his title, while I'm using some of his ideas, this is primarily he's kind of got the big ideas, and I'm filling in all the blanks. So one of the things, we're calling this Grown Up Faith, and this would be an excellent series if you've ever thought about inviting someone to church for a Sunday morning worship service. This would be a great time to do it, because these messages are going to answer some big questions that people have in life. Here are some of the questions we're going to answer during this series. And this is the one we're going to look at today and next week. Why do people get stuck? Is life an accident, or am I here on purpose? There's a lot of people who really wonder, is this life, am I here for real, or was it just an accident? Here's one we hear all the time. Why do bad things happen to good people? We're going to answer that question during this series. How about this one? Can I really trust God? Is God to be trusted? How about this one? I bet you there's a lot of people who think this. Why can't I just make my own rules? Or, why can't God just accept me as I am? Here's another one, even more so in our culture today. Isn't only one way to God a bit narrow-minded? What does it mean to be forgiven? Why don't Christians look differently from everybody else? Who needs church? And are heaven and hell real? We're going to look at those 11 questions during the course of this series. And so I would really encourage you to invite a friend as we explore these questions over several weeks. So let's start with the very first question, is why do people get stuck? This is not my Mercedes-Benz. But as you can see, they've had some issues. I'll readily admit that since we've moved to Eldred, I've gotten stuck in the snow or the mud more times than Pam. And Pam has gotten stuck 0 times. And I've gotten stuck in more than once. The last time, Jeff had to bail me out at 5:30 in the morning. We were heading down to Pam's aunt's funeral, and I'm like, Jeff, can you help me out? Get me out of this snowbank. And Jeff did a great job helping me out of the snowbank, and it was great. But then this summer, you know how wet it was this spring and this summer. And I can't tell you how many times I got the tractor stuck in the bog back here. It was so cool at the picnic. Everybody was parking in that trench that I got stuck in all summer in. So it was kind of cool. But how do you feel when you get stuck? Well, on that wintry morning that I had to call Jeff, I felt embarrassed. I can't believe I got to call someone to help me get out of the ditch. And I thought about calling down to the bus garage, but I'm sure I would have heard that for days about how Dale got stuck in the snowbank. It's a tough feeling when we get stuck. We know and here's what we know. We know that faith is the key to not being stuck. And we know that faith is the answer to life's challenge, and yet we get stuck. We know, or we believe that faith can be transforming, and yet we wonder why we haven't been transformed. If faith is the key, why do we keep getting stuck? And sometimes it's embarrassing to admit. A couple weeks ago, we were having a meeting and somebody said, Pastor, you need to pray for me because I'm stuck. You know what? That took a lot of courage to admit you're stuck. And once you get stuck, it's a lot like being in one of these, a rut. And you've heard me use this illustration before. What is a rut? A rut is simply a grave with both ends kicked out. And it's so hard because, I don't know if you remember the old sign that says, choose your rut carefully because you're going to be in it for a while. And if you ever thought about trying to steer a car out of a rut, I was telling Victor and Maridel that several years ago we went to the Navajo reservation to help with a Wesleyan pastor. And I remember that road was so full of ruts. And it was like, okay, you're just stuck there, and finally you get out of it. And as much as it's hard to get out of a physical rut with your vehicle, it's just that difficult spiritually. You can try to bang against the wall, but you just can't get out. And what we do when we get into a rut, we say, well, I know that this used to work in my spiritual life. So if I go back and do this thing, I'll get myself out of a rut. Sometimes it works, but more often than not, it doesn't. And we just keep trying and we remain stuck in this rut. And believe it or not, it happens in the life of the church. A church gets stuck in the rut. We get stuck in the way that we're going to do things. And we remember the glory days and say, well, if only we did what we did in the glory days, that will bring revival. Maybe it will. Maybe it won't. This past weekend, Anna once again dragged us to a cemetery. She likes dragging us to cemeteries where famous people are buried. Last year we went up to Mount Hope Cemetery in Rochester. We got to see the grave sites of Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass and some others. Fascinating stuff. But this year we went up to Forest Lawn in Buffalo. And what's really interesting about cemeteries is even when they're located right in the city, it seems that when you step onto the property of the cemetery, immediately the world seems to fade into the background. And you're probably wondering, where are you going with this? There's something very fascinating. And on our visit to Forest Lawn, Mount Hope didn't have any of these, but Forest Lawn has something called mausoleums. And they're above ground burial sites. And the buildings are very pretty. On the outside, they're very nicely done. And you walk in, and it's kind of scary because you open the door, and It's almost as quiet as it is here right now. You walk in, and there's this eerie feeling knowing that you are now standing in a building surrounded by the remnants of dead people. You know, last week I cautioned us as a church, and I'm just going to mention this briefly and then we'll kind of move on. But sometimes we treat our churches like museums, or we treat our churches like a shrine, and eventually it becomes a pretty building to look at, but in many ways it's dead spiritually. And so we need to be I want to really be careful to just kind of mention that. And so we need to be really careful as God's people and as God's people together, the church, not to get stuck in a rut. So, why don't we grow up in our faith? How do we get stuck? How do people get stuck? Well, there's several reasons. We're going to look at 3 of those reasons this week because there was no way I could get all 5 reasons in 1 week. We're going to do 3 this week, then 2 next week, and then we're going to go looking at the rest of those questions, and we'll try to take those two at a time. But one of the reasons people get stuck is because they don't realize, they don't know the big picture of what God is doing in the world. And so my question for you this morning is, what is God doing in the world, and how do you and I fit into that picture? Anybody want to take a shot at that? What is God doing in this world, and how do you and I fit in this picture? You're all scared to answer, aren't you? Well, let me ask you a couple questions.
Tell them the world about the Lord.
Okay? All right? So here's a couple questions. Do you believe in God? Do you believe God created the world? That's a huge one. That's a big debate in our culture. Here's one. Why did God create the world? Is that a big question? That is a huge question. And there's people who can't answer that question. Okay, here's another. Why did God give us the Bible? What was God doing in the Old Testament? Why do we have the Old Testament? What is God doing now? I mean, is God at work in our world today, this very moment? Now, some of you are nodding your heads, and I hear the voices of affirmation. God is indeed working. But then, if God is working in the world, is God in the world? What is He doing? And He's worked in the world. Why is the world the way it is? We all have that question, don't we? Why is the world the way it is? Is life random? Or is there more? These are some great questions. And again, we're going to answer some of these as we go through this series. And people are asking these questions. We need to be listening and help them answer these questions. So what we want to do is discover what God's big picture is and how each of us fit in it. So back to the why do people get stuck? Well, one of the things that happens, one of the reasons we get stuck is because we want faith, but we don't want to pay the cost. I think this is really key, and I don't want to be critical, but you know, the preponderance of the prosperity gospel that says you don't, if you are sick, there's a lack in your faith. If you are poor, there is lack of faith. That's not what Jesus said when He was on the earth. Jesus said nothing like that. It has become very popular to say that you can be rich and you can have all the money you want and follow Jesus. We forget that living the life that Jesus lived cost Him His life. The apostles were persecuted and killed for following Jesus. And there are times that we are not willing to count the cost. And Jesus warned his followers. If anybody read my blog this morning, I was this weekend was so busy that I finally got around to writing my Friday devotional this morning. But this was in essence the verse that came up this morning, Matthew 16, 24 through 26. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if any of you wants to be my followers, you must give up your own way. Take up your cross. Follow me. If you try to hang on to your own life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? We as 21st century American Christians believe we can have our cake and eat it too. But the cost of discipleship is high. The cost of faith is high. And it seems as soon as we get into any trouble, as soon as we get sick, we say, why, God, why? Now, there's a couple people sitting in this congregation this morning who have been sick for a long time. And it's really easy to say, why, God, why? Why are you taking me through this? You know, even sometimes when we give the invitation, we say, if you turn your life over to Jesus, everything will be taken care of. That's just the beginning of your troubles. I mean, there's inspiration, right? But you know, when we turn our lives over to Christ, yes, He will be there with us every step of the way, but that does not mean, and to paraphrase an old country song, God never promised us a rose garden. The cost of discipleship, the cost of living life for Jesus is high. In case you might wonder, James 1, 2 through 4. Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, boy, you don't ever hear the prosperity preachers talk about this, do you? Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. Huh?
Yeah.
Huh?
Keep going.
Oh, I like that. Keep going. Keep going. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, mature. You'll be grown up, needing nothing. Whew. Wow. Wow. Following Jesus will cost us something. So don't let anybody rain on your parade and say, you know what? You know why you're still sick? It's because you don't have enough faith. Perhaps that sickness is only serving to increase your faith, increase your endurance, increase your perseverance. Another reason we fail to grow up is because we tend to try out faith rather than train in the faith. I don't know if you know it, but this year is my 10th year birthday of running. It was 10 years ago, on August 31st of 2009, me in my cheap pair of Walmart sneakers, running shoes, stepped onto the track of Robert E. Lee High School in Stanton, Virginia, and I walked 1 mile. This guy, who was 265 pounds, tried to walk a mile. And I did it in 20 minutes. Now, put that in perspective. What do the elite runners run a mile in? Less than 4 minutes. 20 minutes for a mile. The next day, I went out and I said, Pam, come along with me. Not to run, just to time me, because at the time I didn't have my fancy GPS stopwatch that I've got now. So she took our cell phone and she timed me as I did it. I was a little faster than I was the day before. But when I got done, I'm like, Honey, I don't think I'm going to make it to my 45th birthday. I was dying. I was dying. It hurt. And so there was a temptation there to try out running, but never really train. So I had been running for like 3 weeks, and one of the guys from church came up and said, "Hey Dale, there's a 5K, that's 3 miles, right? There's a 5K happening on Veterans Day. Would you like to, I think you should run in it." I looked at him like he had 5 heads. What do you mean? So that was in November. That was November 11th. So this was August 31st, the first time on the track. That was November 11th. I'll never forget. I was so proud of myself. At one point, I got to the point where I ran from our house out to a stoplight and ran back, and it was 4 miles. I'll never forget the first time that I stopped at the stoplight to rest for like 2 minutes and then run back home. I almost ran 4 miles straight. So 2 days, I told our pastor, I'm like, "Hey, I'm going out for a run." I told him what I did, and he goes, "The next time you go out to run, you need to do the whole 4 miles. So the next time I went out, I ran a full 4 miles. Here I went from running, it took me 20 minutes to run 1 mile as a run walk, to like 4 weeks later, running 4 miles straight. Now, it wasn't fast. It was pretty slow. But I did it. And slowly but surely, so this is the picture from the day that I ran the 5K that my buddy told me that I needed to sign up for. At 255 pounds, I ran 3 miles in 39 minutes. I was pretty proud of myself. Especially, you can't tell it, but that's a long, steep hill. And so you're climbing, and this was like the second time around. I was starting to feel it. I'll never forget that moment. But just because I ran 3 miles does not mean I was ready for a half marathon or even a full marathon, 13 miles or 26 miles. And I'll never forget the time I went out for my first 6-mile run. I was scared to death. I was like, well, I can run 5 miles, but 6 miles, that's like a whole extra mile. So I did. And I came and I lifted Hello. And then there was a time I decided I was building up from 6 miles, 7 miles, 8 miles, 9 miles. I was getting ready to run for the first time. I was getting ready to run 10 miles. Pam goes, "I hope you don't die." Like, I hope I don't die either. But there was, every time you hit a new milestone, it was like, can I do it? And so finally, I started training at 10 miles, and Stanton had this 10-mile race. So this is me about a year later, finishing the 10-miler. I had lost a little bit of weight. I wasn't near as big as I was the year before. And then, finally I said, you know what? I want to do a half marathon. And so I trained and got up to be able to do 13 miles. And so we went to Danville, Virginia, and I ran, there's one more finish race. This is me, I think, another year later, or maybe 2 years later. But you can see I was skinny as a rail, and I ran 13 miles in less time than it took me to run 10 miles the year before. I was pretty serious. I was really training, and one of the things our pastor said, he goes, "I have never experienced somebody like you." He goes, I've tried to get a lot of guys to run, but they all end up injured. They all would end up with shin splints, and they'd end up with bad knees, and they'd end up with bad ankles. And he goes, "But you like took to it." So here I am. I remember, because back when I was in elementary school, we'd have to run 300 yards, and I always finished in last place. I'm like, I'm never going to be a runner ever again. But you know, when we train for something, it's amazing. And turns out I was a natural born runner. I didn't even know it. I'm a slow runner. I don't run fast, but I enjoy those long. Matter of fact, yesterday I ran 9 miles. I loved it. It was great. That last mile and a half, though, I was like, It was hurting, but I kept going. I kept persevering, and I did it. But it's important that if I want to run long, I have to train for it. If I want to run, I have to train. And our faith is like that. 1 Timothy says, physical training is good. Physical training is good. So it's good to be in shape. We don't talk we don't talk about that in church much, do we? Physical training is good. It's good to stay in shape. It's good to make sure that our sugar numbers are down. It's good to know that our cholesterol number is down. Paul says physical training is good, but training for godliness is much better, promising benefits in this life and the life to come. This is a trustworthy saying that everyone should accept. This is why we work hard and continue to struggle. Training isn't easy. Yesterday I wanted to give up. When I got to the park in Portville, I'm like, I want to give up. But I said, I'm going to finish this 9 miles. This is why we work hard and continue to struggle, for our hope is in the living God, who is the Savior of all the people, and particularly of all believers. We live in such an instant fix society. Every morning we watch Channel 2. Every morning I hear the commercial. Cool sculpting. We've all seen the commercials for the diet pills. We've all seen the commercials for the little physical, the roller thing that they do. Ab roller and those things. And they always promise instant results without working out. Not possible. That's not the way the body works. We cannot take the easy way out. And we can't do that in the faith either. We always want to take the easy way out. I always laugh when I see commercials that talk about how you can lose weight or inches without doing a bit of physical work. Our bodies must be disciplined. They must be trained in order to lose weight, gain strength. And if it's that way for our physical bodies, it's the very same for our spiritual bodies. We must be trained in righteousness and faith. And guess what? It's hard work. Paul reminds young Timothy that we need to work hard in our spiritual training. And I've learned, at least in my physical training, that when the training hurts the most, it's when it does the most good. And it promises benefits that are out of this world, and we should always work hard in our spiritual times. And there are times that we all, me included, we'd rather get on the God phone and say, hey God, I'm done for today. We're just ready to call in our training. I've done that in a run. I've said, you know what? I've run 7 miles. I don't need to run the whole 9 miles. That's why some of this has come back on. Because I wasn't willing to go it the whole distance. And so sometimes there's times we don't want to go the whole distance. We don't want to pray as we should. We don't want to read the word as we should. We don't want to come to church as we should. We don't want to do any number of things as we should. We don't want to disciple as we should. But when we do that, we lose the benefits of training in faith and in righteousness, and we get stuck. This past summer at Refresh, Dr. Meredith Griffin spoke about acorns. Can you imagine a camp speaker 5 nights in a row spoke about acorns? Probably thinking, how can you get that much out of an acorn? Well, it was pretty amazing. He was an amazing speaker. In case that you're not familiar, an acorn is a nut, right? Wrong. Did you know that an acorn is a fruit? It's not a nut. Acorns are the fruit of the oak tree. And here's what I want to challenge you with as we wrap this up today. It's a real challenge to get unstuck. The typical oak tree will produce 10,000 acorns in a good season. And a good season comes about every 4 to 5 years. It's called a mast season. But on a mast season, an acorn, a typical oak tree will produce 10,000 acorns. You want to know how many acorns that fall from that tree end up being another oak tree? 1. 1. What happens to the rest? Well, they fall to the ground. If you walk around Portville, you see a lot of acorns laying on the ground. Some get crushed by cars. Squirrels harvest some of them. Less than 1% of the crop of an oak tree will produce a new oak tree. And yet, the oak tree will still produce acorns even though it does not produce a new tree. So you're probably thinking, Pastor Dale, what does that have to do with me? Well, one of the things that Dr. Griffin said, and if this statistic is true, we ought to all repent, and we all ought to get busy getting unstuck. 92 to 98% of believers fail to mature enough in their own spiritual walk, enough to disciple another person in his or her faith. Wait a second. You mean to tell me that 2 to 8% of the believers in the world are producing all of the trees? And if the gospel is growing, and there's some debates as to whether it is or isn't, it's all being done by 2 to 8%. Wow. So I want to challenge us this morning. The challenge this morning is to grow in our faith, to get unstuck in our faith so that we can be a church that not only makes disciples, but multiplies disciples.